everybody. Today on the channel, the fastest and most powerful road-going Bentley ever made. The 2017 Continental Supersports has the numbers, but has it got the feel of a proper Bentley? Well, let's find out. Continental GT is a model with which I've had a very curious relationship. I recall when the car was launched 2 decades ago, instantly becoming the go-to for your local footballer of choice. However, I was never really taken with the looks of it, and even though in later years I've gotten to drive a few and quite enjoyed them, it's never been a car that I wanted. The current third generation car, meanwhile, I almost feel the opposite about. It's beautiful to look at, both outside and in, complete with nice little details like the fabulous Bentley rotating display. However, to drive, I found the car to be a great disappointment. In short, it just doesn't feel as supple and comfortable as a Bentley really should. After all, it's the Continental GT, Grand Tourer, and I think they were trying to make it handle like a sports car, which, when you consider the fact it weighs the best part of 2.5 tons, was never going to end particularly well. The sweet spot then for me might be this, the second generation car. Introduced in 2011, it is essentially an evolution of the first and built on fundamentally the same platform. The looks though were sharpened up and a number of major mechanical changes were introduced, including a new V8 engine to go alongside the existing twin-turbo W12. To see out the first generation car, Bentley had given us the rather wonderful Supersports. And yes, I know I've just complained about Bentleys being too stiff, however, the Supersports, as a limited edition, deliberately hardcore model, I think gets a pass. And though of course dynamically it still fell some way short of the benchmark set by the likes of Porsche, Ferrari, Aston Martin and Maserati, it is in of itself a wonderful thing. And so, when the second generation arrived, people began asking, are we going to get another Supersports? The answer, as you can tell, was of course eventually yes. However, before this car arrived, we got something arguably even more special, the 2014 GT3R, a car that I am very lucky to have sampled, and one that was inspired by Bentley's somewhat surprising success on track. And, even in present company, that is easily the most focused and hardcore of all the modern Bentleys. But what made it quite so special for me is the fact that, in spite of its clearly very sporting looks, it was still an absolute joy to drive, and a proper Bentley. But there were a couple of things about it that I think Bentley fans didn't like. First off being the fact that they chose the V8 engine. They did so because that's what the race car had, and if you're trying to build a lighter, tauter Bentley, that's a very good starting point. They also, in the name of weight saving, ditched the back seats, much like the first generation Supersports Coupe. And while that is a commendable thing to do, it also, for me and many others, renders redundant one of the great selling points of the Continental GT, which is the fact that, unlike a 911, Jaguar XK, Aston Martin DB9 and a whole bunch of other 2+2 sporty cars, it's a real 4-seater. You can get 4 people in here. Maybe not for all that long, and maybe not particularly tall ones, but compared to just about any of those cars, it's miles better. You also have a decent sized boot, and while that of course wasn't changed for the GT3R, this to me really is the sort of car you want to buy to do explicitly big, long, proper trips in. It would appear though that Bentley were very aware the GT3R was not to all tastes, and so in 2017, just as the second model's production was being wound down, they gave us this, the Supersports 710. The regular Continental GT speed is hardly lacking in terms of top trumps, with 625 horsepower and 590 pound-foot on tap. This turned it up to 11, or more accurately, 710. That's the horsepower figure, which pales in comparison to the torque number. That rose to 750. Not Newton meters, pounds feet. For those in metric, that's 1,017. This also then adopted a version of many of the features that made the GT3R stand out, including more aggressive styling here on the later facelift shape. You've got a nice fruity exhaust which burbles on the overrun in a rather magnificent way. There is also an uprated and quicker shifting version of the ZF 8-speed gearbox and a newer iteration of the torque vectoring introduced in the 3R, which, to be fair here, just means it's braking individual wheels, not real proper torque vectoring. They did, though, naturally still retain the car's all-wheel drive system, which is capable of sending up to 85% of the torque to whichever end it's needed. And on a day like this, where it is damp and just 11 degrees, sorry, 11 and a half, I'm very grateful for that fact, as I am to this car's owner, Jay, who's come all the way from Andorra to bring it to me. Actually, he was here anyway, but he took time out of his schedule to give the car to me for review. And I've got to say, though I've still yet to put my foot down, I'm really enjoying it. I've often said to people that the best part of this job is not just getting to drive the cars, but also to meet the people behind them. And that's never been more true than today, because Jay is a very interesting young chap, a cyclist, and apparently, I don't really know much about the world of cycling, quite a good one. He's always been a bit of a petrol head, but growing up in Australia, anything decent is generally very expensive. My Australian fans like to remind me of this on a constant basis. And if you are watching from down under, g'day, or good evening, or good middle of the night. Jay's career then took him on a bit of a change of location, and, needing to move to Europe, he found himself housed in the tiny little and very picturesque Principality of Andorra. And, having now found a bit of success in his life, Jay decided to treat himself to the car he'd always wanted, which for him was a second-generation Aston Martin DBS, the Casino Royale shaped one. My 3-point turn hill start torture test. Visibility is actually not that bad in this car. Is there a reversing camera? Yes, there is, and parking sensors everywhere. Yeah, pretty good. There was, however, a couple of issues in Jay's way. First off, Andorra being a small little place with just 70,000 people, there aren't a lot of cars to choose from locally. And if you want to import one, it has to be Euro 6 compliant, which ruled out the DBS. The newer DBS was too much money, he didn't want a DB11, and so he decided to look what else out there gave him this continent cruising ability he knew he would need in a car that was a little bit different and a little bit special. Eventually, he happened upon this, and he appears to be a very, very happy customer. So, let's see, when you've got the road to yourself and the traffic has gone, what makes the Supersports so beguiling? Never have I been more grateful for all-wheel drive. That 750 pound-foot of torque, it arrives at just 2,050 RPM. There is quite a bit of turbo lag in this engine, which has been changed mechanically from that in the regular car. It's got new bearings and new turbos. In truth, it still shouldn't really be this laggy because, let's be honest here, Ferrari got more power out of the then current F12 from an engine with just 300cc more capacity and no turbos. Sure, it has to rev 2,500 RPM higher than this to do it. The red line here is at just over 6. But anyone that's ever revved out an F12 will tell you it's not much of a chore at all. You can tell fairly straight away it's a car of a very different character to the GT3R. You notice that extra weight over the front, although you also notice the prodigious ability of this engine. Now, in fairness, the GT3R that I drove was making about the same power as this because it had been modified. This is entirely stock. I've got to say, it's stupendous. I am currently in comfort mode for the suspension. It still has air ride, but in a lower and slightly stiffer setup for the Supersports. Around town, it is a little firmer than I had expected, and I was worried they might have ruined it, but that is not the case at all. Get even a little bit of speed on, by which I mean sort of 30 or 40 mile an hour, and the whole thing does start to make a lot of sense. Grip is fantastic too, and the car's giving me the confidence to put my foot down where in lots of other stuff, even with less power, I just wouldn't. Let us, though, for the sake of science, change the suspension mode into one of its slightly sportier settings. Let's have a 3 out of 4 on the damper screen, and immediately you can sense a difference. The car becomes a lot tauter. You feel more of the imperfections in the road. And it's when you do that, you do sense the fact the car is still carrying quite a bit of heft. Yes, it's 40 kilos lighter than the GT Speed, but that means it's just under 2.3 tons rather than just over. For some reference, my F12 is about 560 kilos lighter. That's a lot. I've got to say, this interior is absolutely gorgeous. I love the sort of plum and cream colour combination, and I also quite like this sort of weird pattern here too. I'm not entirely sure whether it's meant to be a chessboard or a checkered flag. Pass. The seats are pretty decent, not quite as spectacular as those in the GT3R or the original Supersport, which had ones from Veyron. They are comfy, have your heating and ventilation. I'm going to have a bit of ventilation actually, and they do a good enough job, but if you're expecting sporty buckets, that's not them. I was shifting manually already back there, and to be honest, the gearbox actually is pretty good. You've got three options basically, either drive auto, sport auto, or manual. I'm actually going to just push it over to hold it in manual, and as we've got a straight clear piece of road, let me give you a demonstration of the speed of this car. So we're doing 30 mile an hour now in third, so we're doing 2000 RPM right at the bottom of that torque peak, which comes in at 2050 RPM and finishes at 4.5 grand. So gonna let this car go past and then we'll boot it. 3, 2, 1, that's foot flat, and the turbo's building boost. There we are, there's 40, 50, 60. Oh, this is good. I am told that it's quite thirsty. Unfortunately, all of the numbers up here are in metric, and I don't understand, but I think 19.8 litres per 100 kilometres is quite a lot. Yes, drinks this car, but then it's a 710 horsepower, 2.3 ton Bentley. What did you expect? Other numbers, it's 0 to 62 time, 3.5 seconds, and top speed 209 mile an hour. Then, should you want to explore that performance, helping you rein it all in are a set of gargantuan 420mm carbon silica discs up the front and 365mm ones at the back. They're big, really big, and they work. The pedal doesn't really have all that much feel, it's quite soft, but does allow you to modulate the system fairly effectively. I've also noticed once you get it to about, I think, 3.5, 4,000 RPM, it does sound like a valve opens in that exhaust. I'm going to try and get you a little bit of that noise. Right, it's going to involve a few low gears. Here we go. Crikey, oh blimey. This car coming out in 2017, it was one of the last made before the restrictions came in on exhausts, including the fitment of OPFs and the introduction of new sound regs. So this is also likely going to be one of the last Bentleys to sound like this. Even in first gear, it's raining. The car just digs in. I'm really frustrated with Bentley because I drive cars like this and I fall in love with them. Then I look at the third gen and they just seem to have given up. At the time of its introduction, this was both the fastest and most powerful Bentley ever made. I'm fairly sure it's not going to be the most powerful for all that much longer. In fact, I'm genuinely surprised there hasn't already been an electric Bentley, which makes this look like a Tonka toy. However, in terms of fastest, I think it's got a pretty good chance of holding on to the record for quite some time. It was also made in very limited numbers, only 710 combined of both coupe and convertible. Compare that with the 1800 of the old Supersports, and you can see it's a very special thing. And yet, today, you can pick this up that once cost £212,500 plus options for 90 grand. I know Bentleys depreciate, I know they do, it's always been their thing, they're famous for it, but stuff like this, and the GT3R, that was the same, you can get one of those now for about 95 grand. They really shouldn't. We're talking top-end Boxster basic entry-level 911 money here, and what you've got is far more special than any 911 I've ever driven. Jay considered a 911 Turbo for about 2 seconds and then realised it wasn't a car that excited him, and just about everybody has one. He wanted something special, and here he's got it. Now, while prices for cars like this on the continent are a lot higher, and this is no exception, you would have thought that the nation which birthed it, and still is one of Bentley's biggest customers, would appreciate just what it is. Apparently not. And that, to me, is a crying shame, because this is just superb. No, it won't go around a bend like just about anything sporty, any of the other cars that I've mentioned. However, even in its firmer suspension mode, it's still quite compliant. It's noisier, sure, than, say, a Merc CL60 something or other, which would, I think, be really this car's natural and possible only rival. And while the Merc is maybe in some ways perhaps even nicer inside and will have more technology, it just doesn't have the allure of the Bentley. This is proper. Make no mistake. Would I have this or a GT3R? Well, I want to say the GT3R, because it's wild and crazy and nuts and I like stuff like that. However, those back seats, I couldn't justify having one of these without them. And so while this maybe doesn't quite take the crown, I think it can run the GT3R an extraordinarily close second in being the best Bentley I've ever driven. I absolutely love it. And so, there we go. All that remains to be said is a massive thank you to Jay for coming out with his car, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.